Okay, I think we can get started here. Hi, I'm Holly Quinn. I am the lead reporter for Technically Delaware, and this is the workshop, Three Secrets Tech Companies Should Know Around Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity. This is going to be an interactive session reviewing real mistakes and solutions for adapting culture. Our speakers are Jael Chambers, the president of Cultured Enough, and Elisa Vasquez, a diversity and inclusion consultant for Cultured Enough. So I'm going to turn off my camera and let you guys have it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate everyone for showing up. I do want to give a little bit of a backdrop of how this conversation came about. And I would say around 5 months ago, walking through in COVID and having a lot of companies reach out to us, specifically tech companies, there were a few common themes we started to hear that it was, for me, especially my consultants that I get to work with, it was one of those things where I called Brother Christopher from Technically and sort of said, hey, I think it could be so interesting to do a workshop on these three things that we have seen tech industries like try to do, and I would say unconsciously making mistakes in how they're approaching diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some nuggets that we want to give through this time about when you're preparing to do it, the posture one should have, things you should know if you're trying to create an RFP, to even setting a culture for your organization while you're going through this process that's going to success instead of setting you up for what we call failure or more of a challenging moment with your organization. So my name is Jael. Work for Coach Enough. My background is in diversity, inclusion, and equity for-profit and nonprofit. Specifically, I did a lot of work and still do in higher education in K-12 sectors. And I live in Philadelphia.
Yes, Philly. Thanks, Jael. My name is Elisa Vasquez. I'm also in Philly. Been with Coach Enough for about the past 2 years now, and really love what I get to do in terms of working alongside partners, nonprofit and for-profit, really analyzing the HR policies, procedures, how to be better in terms of treating their employees, really analyzing how diversity impacts their retention and engagement and innovation within the organization. So we love what we get to do, Jael, and it's been a privilege to be able to be on this platform and to really get to speak to the tech industry. We know that tech, as well as a lot of other industries, have a hard time with diversity and inclusion, and not only getting the numbers up or meeting a quota. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how can you create also a culture of inclusion and equity as well, and really not checking the box or having that feeling of getting the job done, but having it be a part of the culture and in which you have within your organization. And even within the last month, Jael, I know that you and I, especially more so you, having to work with different organizations with the pressure of society within the last, probably around summertime, I will say, of having that pressure and just also accountability, I want to say, with different organizations in doing that. And from those experiences, we're going to touch on just three things that we thought were important and what we also found to be true with organizations within that.
Yeah, I do want to put on my educational hat at this moment. Specific industries have a higher
He left. All right, hopefully he comes back. But we're gonna get into it, because I think what Jael was segueing to say is that there are specific industries, and we have experience with the health industry as well in terms of working with different industries within Philadelphia. So we do have experience with working with the education sector, the health sector, and working with different health communities, and also now tech, and working with the relationship with Technically. And we do see that specific industries with breaking through the barrier of diversity, inclusion, and equity. So seeing that and the experience that we've had with that, we want to work with and partner with organizations that have a specifically hard time with those things. And what we like to do in really make a culture of having diversity and inclusion not be this lofty goal, but have it be simple, fun, and relational. And when we deal with our partners, we really want it to be a relationship and learning their story of how they got to their workplace and learning the story behind their purpose within the organization as well. So we really like to hear people's stories and how they got to where they are, and making diversity and inclusion not something, because to be honest, JL, and you can speak to this, is that some, especially white CEOs, are navigating this space for the first time. So we want to make it as less intimidating, less taboo, less controversial as possible, and really meet people where they are, because we understand that with diversity and inclusion, people are at different learning curves, and people are learning for the first time how to navigate this new space. And Jay, I know you got cut off, but is there anything you wanted to add to what you were saying?
Well, I really want to echo what you summed it up very well, is knowing the industry one's in, and also finding ways to say, how do you create a culture that has healthy interactions, that dismantles biases, microaggressions. And so for the tech industry, data has shown that the ways to do that is to create intentional interactions, to allow opportunities where people can interact with each other, have experiences where they can learn together outside, not just of doing projects. And so one of the things we want to echo is, for me, in the last 5 months specifically, getting a lot of calls from people in the tech world. I've seen some of these conversations become almost like a check the box, and not a check the box, but like, okay, so if we do this, are we going to have diversity now? If we do this, is that going to give us the success we need? And it's almost this concept of like, even if you do the right algorithms, you're still dealing with people. You're still dealing with structures that sometimes you do the right thing that still means you have a higher chance of getting the right results. And that's sort of why I want to have this conversation. Was I think there's some secrets to help, especially people in the tech world who are passionate about equity, inclusion, and diversity, sort of think about this and say, okay, how do we start from a different posture into these conversations? So if you're interested in new implementing in your organization, or you might say, hey, we want to bring in a consultant or develop an RFP, let's make sure that your RFP or you bring in a consultant and makes sense for the sustainability of the organization, not just a quick fix. And that gets to the first thing that is a secret that could help organizations out.
Yes, thanks, JL. Great segue. We know that when you hear diversity in training, the first things that come to mind probably are like implicit bias, cultural competence. If you're aware of this space and things of that. And so, JL, I know that a lot of people came to Cultured Enough and you to really just, okay, George Floyd happened, Ahmaud Arbery happened. There's a big response within the Black and Brown community right now in my organization. What training can I do for us and the staff to be more aware? Or what training can I do for our Black and Brown employees to feel more safe within the organization? So what did you say to that? Because the intention is good and the intention is there. But what was Cultured Enough's response when companies wanted to implement trainings right away in response to what happened this summer?
Well, I think what you said is beautiful. The intention seemed right. My first response, and you know this, is, well, have you done training in the past? And what else are you doing besides training? Because we assume training fixes institutional structures. It helps, but it doesn't change policies. It doesn't change processes. It really, in some ways, doesn't impact culture if it's not communicated well and followed through with. And so that's one of the fascinating things, is when we start to ask organizations, hey, how many times do you have intentional conversations about cross-cultural interaction or power and gender dynamics, or implicit bias or culture dynamics, implicit bias, affinity bias? Most organizations said, oh, we never talked about it, but we want this to be our first time. And my first response is like, whoa, pause. So you're telling me the first you want to have a conversation and do some trainings, but you've not done anything in the past. How do you know these are effective trainings we should do? What's the culture around the organization? Is this going to create more trauma for staff, maybe even minorities? And so, yeah, so that's one of the things that we thought about and we look. And Elisa, you could probably share, why do you feel like, or we see that's the first responses that we go to when issues happen, especially in the last 5 months? We've seen everyone and their mama, grandma, pops call us. And one of the first things they say is, hey, can we do a training? Or we want to do a 2-hour training or a 1-hour training. Why do you think that is, that our first response is to do a training?
Well, it's kind of probably what they think is the first solution, right? It's like, what can I control? What can I pay for? What can I do really quickly to give them a 1-hour training? One, maybe to help satisfy their employees, to be like, hey, this is what we're doing. But also for education purposes as well. And I do want to say, when trainings, and this is research-based and data-based as well, when trainings are done outside of a system or outside of a strategic plan, that is kind of where you may bring confusion to the workplace. So all of a sudden you want to do a training in psychological safety or training in cultural trauma. You have to do it in a container where your employees are prepped for it and ready for it, as well as there's going to be follow-up afterwards. Like, you receive this training, what's the follow-up to come?
Yeah, well, speaking to that, because you just said something, prepping, I mean, once again, because we do this normally as a living, but you said prepping employees and staff for the training. Explain how important that is, because there was a great article also done by Harvard Business Review about the cultural trauma on Black individuals in the last few months with addressing issues of race in their work environment. So explain a little bit why it's important to prep if you're going to effectively do a training that's going to bring change.
Right. And by prepping, I mean getting a pulse and getting a climate on where the organization is. So what we do in Cultured Enough is, even before we even talk about training, we got to say, hold up, what are the gaps? What are the areas of improvement that your company needs? Do we have leadership buy-in from your CEO and your senior leadership to be able to implement a strategic plan such as this? And then really doing an assessment on getting a pulse and a climate of where the organization is. And that has to do with focus groups. When you do focus groups, we're kind of prepping and finessing that whole process, because we're getting buy-in from your employees on their perception and their experience within your organization. So that's kind of what I mean by prepping, is that understanding and getting buy-in from your employees before even training. And what you mentioned in the last workshop, Jael, was important, is trust, right? So when you're a leader or a CEO, when you're sending out the surveys, you're doing the focus groups, you are assuming that your employees are going to trust you to follow through thereafter. They're providing you with your information. And you did a good point, Jael, about how usually you're asking Black and brown people to kind of share about their experience within your organization. That is builds a trust factor in, right? So when they're sharing their experience, even you're a white person or a white woman within the organization, they're sharing their experiences within the organization. They're opening up to you about what's wrong. You are now held responsible to follow up on that training and what is thereafter.
Yeah, that's so good. If anyone has questions, we'll stop and answer them. Let's see if there's a question. Is there a statement?
Carolina,
yep.
Go ahead. Is there a statement or phrase that you've heard often that is seemingly positive and with good intentions, but can sound patronizing and insulting?
Yeah.
Is there a phrase that you've heard often that is seemingly positive and with good intentions, but can sound patronizing and insulting?
Yeah. So in this time, and I say a lot of this, was that, Carolina, that was a great question, because a lot of this we go back to leaders being aware of their own cultural and emotional intelligence of how to ask a question. So this question sounds a little devaluing when, and staff have shared this with us, hey, we're going to do this 1-hour training, and then after this 1 hour training, we're going to get back to work and do the things we should be doing. That sounds like, hey, is this not important? Or when people reached out to us and said, hey, we're interested in your services, we want to do this training. We don't have enough time. So is it possible for you to do a 2-hour training, but try to clump that into an hour, but just address these specific topics, and then we'll discuss in the next like year later. And so it seems a little patronizing and insulting. It's less of, I think, patronizing, insulting to us, and more I just think of the staff members. I think of, no one wants to go into a place or a work environment and feel like, hey, my supervisors of my organization doesn't take the time to address an important issue. And that's what we see when we do a lot of our assessments and audit, is there's a huge disparity between minority staff compared to maybe white or dominant culture, because for them, they're saying, hey, this is my life I'm experiencing every day. And we're only taking an hour out of the year, 2 hours out of the year, or every 5 months to just talk about this topic when someone gets shot or it becomes a national issue. That becomes like, they feel like, hey, this isn't psychologically safe. And so I like to tell supervisors, one of the best ways to know if you're emotionally intelligent is you have to get a pulse. And even if you don't think it's important to yourself, make sure that you're aware that it's important to other staff people. And if it's not important to them, the question is why? Why are we not addressing a topic that is impacting people in their work environments, especially when they go home? And so that's one of the things where we have found good intentions, but even the approach of coming into the conversation and say, hey, the idea the posture I would say to have is, hey, we know we need to do some trainings. You let us know what's the appropriate amount and what it should look like to be effective. Not what we think is effective, but what's actually effective. So this isn't just an add-on, but this is a part of the culture of the organization.
Yeah, and I do know that with our partners, sometimes we've had to go in and do either conflict resolution or crisis de-escalation, because what it usually is a white CEO trying to navigate this new space, says something with good intentions, but it is offensive to the person of the different culture or the different background. So we have to really come in sometimes if they can't do it on their own and really say what he really meant was, that becomes just a learning opportunity. And we really approach our partners, especially those who are navigating for the first time. What we really do is we have a certain grace for people who are learning this for the first time. Others have experienced microaggressions, have experienced marginalization within their own workplace for years. They could have experienced all their life. However, there are some people who are just now awakening to that. And we have grace on that with people who are just learning, and really having those experiences be an education opportunity for everyone at the table.
Yep. One thing I do want to echo, the best thing as a leader and is to always start with a statement like this. I know this is uncomfortable to me, and I'm leading out of vulnerability, and it might be uncomfortable to a lot of other people. And then ask a question so that you're allowing to sort of show people that, hey, this is something I'm not comfortable with. So if I have a question, and then you have to trust the experts or trust the people who give you a suggestion. Typically what happens is that we say, hey, we want suggestions. And then someone gives a suggestion and then they say no. And I've experienced that with CEOs of like, hey, I don't think a training is going to be the best. And then they say, no, we want training. And then they do the training with another organization. They call us back months later and they said, yeah, that training didn't go well. We should do something else. And I'm like, yes. But once again, that's why you would hire an expert or listen to the people around you so they can help you make effective decisions.
Yes, thank you. That's a great segue to our second secret or nugget, if you will. Knowing the cost if you do not address equity, inclusion, and diversity. And that's it's a powerful statement, because counting the cost of not addressing it is what a good CEO leader would be able to do. When you don't include diversity, that research also says is that being count the cost of how much you avoiding this big elephant in the room you're affecting retention rate, you're affecting the engagement of your employees, and you're also affecting the innovation. So if you want to get into those numbers, there are numbers and dollars behind how much retention and engagement and innovation is not being used within your organization. When people do not feel safe, when people from all backgrounds and all genders and all ethnicities do not feel safe within your organization, you are risking those three things: innovation, retention, and engagement. And even when you look to the effects of you not addressing it, the whole world is addressing it. So if you're not addressing it, it's gonna be a big red flag for people.
Yep. And one of the things, I think is essential is for us to get to the point to ask the question why. Why are we not addressing it? Is it because and this is something that we all have to do, a self-evaluation. Is it because we're fearful that we don't know the language? Is it because we don't have the right tools? Or is it because we're not important to us? And if it's fearful because we don't have the right language, I think we should say that out loud and then affirm to say, but we still need to address it. And here's why we're going to address it and the cost of that. And there is a financial cost in this, because we know people who feel psychologically safe, you're going to have more innovation. You're going to have happier employees. And if you can't come into your work environment and share ideas, concepts, and tell leadership like, hey, I think this is a great time for us to have a conversation. And some people might have to just lead up, and that's uncomfortable. I'm aware of leading up usually is the power and gender dynamic. However, stepping into a lot of these conversations, it's been interesting hearing minorities say, I wish someone would have spoke up. I wish someone besides myself would have said, can we take some time? What are we doing as an organization to address injustice or our hiring processes? Do we have biases? And that's something that takes someone who's willing to be bold. And I think we do need bold leaders in this day and age to speak up about topics and not just critique outside, but to ask ourselves internally, what is our organization doing when it comes to combating and dismantling racism, institutional structures that are marginalizing specific groups?
Right. And just to echo, Vincent Better in the chat said, it does speak volumes when those issues are ignored. So even when you're silent about a topic, your silence speaks louder than when you don't speak up at all. And even I know that sometimes we may be talking to people who are navigating this for the first time. Again, I want to keep reiterating that to allow you to feel that you're not alone in this, and that if you are not aware of the intricacies of diversity and inclusion, surround yourself with people who are, whether that is an outside party like Coach It Enough or another consulting firm, whether it's friends that can help you understand someone of a different culture than you, someone of a different standpoint and perspective. Surround yourself with people of where your weak spots are, because that's a sign of a good leader in general.
That is so true. And once again, any questions, any questions that you may have, please, we want to make a dialogue and have a conversation, because we want to answer the questions that you think are important or want us to address. And one of the last ones is realistic expectation and budget. I have found that sometimes the desire is there, but the heart to say, hey, we want to now make sure in a year we're going to wipe away all the implicit bias and structures that we have around power dynamics, racism in our organization. Isn't that realistic if you haven't continually done some of this type of work, but also if you're not intentional. And so I think that's one of the things we talked about at the beginning when Caroline was like, hey, what are some things that could be offensive? I think some of the most offensive things is almost saying that, hey, we can do this so quick, and assuming that it's not going to take time, energy, a buy-in, and money. And here's what I mean by a budget. Starting anything from scratch, you need a budget for it. So when you're thinking about doing a budget to actually say, we want to be an organization that values diversity, inclusion, and equity, if you don't know where to start, there actually has to be like a budget
Yep.
and time to say, do we give? So a budget shouldn't be like, we have maybe $2,000 and we want to do a strategic plan and then do a diversity audit and do 15 trainings. That's just not realistic. So like do some research, know that how much a budget's going to be to do a diversity audit, and then maybe even do a diversity strategic plan, and then maybe saying, hey, we're going to do 5 trainings, and make sure that your budget isn't like the short end of it, as in saying like, we're going to do this and say, we're going to pay someone $100 to do a 1-hour training. If you're about this life, if you really want to dismantle some of these structures in your organization, be equitable in how you fund people that do this work. Be equitable. If you have a task force, give you the task force a budget so that the task force has training. Let's not just develop a task force like we see organizations do. And then I meet with the task force and I'm like, the task force has no training. They don't know where to start. What's your budget? And they say, we don't have a budget. I'm like, well, how are you going to do some of these things that you want to develop in an organization if you don't have a budget? So I feel like those are the things that I'm learning, and knowing where you start at. And Elisa, you can speak into this after I'm done, because I think it's important, is that everyone wants to be the Google, or everyone wants to be like the Nike. And I use those examples of like people with a budget and say, hey, we want to be the most diverse. However, some of us are at the startup. So maybe the first thing we can do is say, we're going to intentionally have a statement around where we stand on equity, inclusion, and diversity, and justice as a whole organization. From there, build your statement and work on steps. Don't try to move to say, we've never done anything around diversity, inclusion, and equity, and then 6 months to a year, we want to now be the adult diversity organization that has implicit bias training, onboarding processes. That's just not realistic. And if anything, that just burns people out because it wasn't thought about correctly and effectively.
Right. That's great. And I love the levels of organization, because if you can like know the pulse of where you're at in terms of your leadership and organization, are you at startup in terms of this navigating this space for the first time? Or are you kind of mature because your people are trained up and ready to hit the ground running? So it's always good to get a pulse on that. Speak to realistic expectations. When you think of what makes up a business, you're looking at your finances, your marketing, your product or service that you provide to your clients. We're now doing a paradigm shift in every industry where diversity and inclusion has to be a part of those engines that make your motor work. It can't be off the side thing. It can't be, an added agenda to the meeting list. It can no longer do that. We can't afford to really lose our employees because of this paradigm shift within every industry. And Cultured Enough is industry agnostic. That means that we service the education sector, nonprofit, faith-based churches, for-profit organizations. So we see across the board that there's a commonality with different organizations and different companies where D&I can no longer be just an added item to the list. It really has to be budgeted, prioritized, as everything else does. You budget marketing, you have a budget line for marketing. D&I and training also needs to be a budget line item for that, and it needs to be upheld in a priority where it probably wasn't in the last decade.
Very well said. And love what Vincent said also. He said, look at it through the lens of participation, not just policies. And that's one of the things when we audit organizations, we look at policies, processes, culture, and tracking, because a great thing, I'm glad you mentioned it, Vincent, is sometimes we just say, hey, we have the policies there and we're doing a good job. But then you're like, no, like, are we follow through with the policies? Are we processing now? Are we communicating? Is a culture where people are participating? It's so much layers into having a healthy organization that is the opposite of creating structures that are marginalizing people. So by being intentional, and so intentionality is going to be essential to keep this going, or it's going to fall because it's hard work to do that. And sometimes we assume that it can be a one fix all, a quick fix answer, and it's just not.
Yeah. And just a segue to investment, some of the things that we offer our partners and that we recommend that you look into having a third party assist with this work is doing an audit and assessment of where the climate or where the pulse of the organization is. So if you're able to do an audit, what we call a diversity audit or assessment, we bring in assessment tools where we kind of measure and use our own indicators and metrics to be able to give you a pulse on where your organization is. And that is an investment of about 2 months that we take to do a process of that. We ask participation from your employees as well as your board development to see where your board is and your volunteers. So if you're you have a volunteer base, we love to also understand and bring that into the audit. And so the training and the coaching that we touched on a little bit is another form of investment. Like Jael said, there's money involved in this. There's an investment in this. But the thing is that you have to keep in mind of your ROI. Like, what is your return of this type of investment? You're investing in your people. And as I aforementioned just about in this project, you're investing in your people that are bringing in innovation, they're bringing in engagement, and you're increasing your retention within your organization. And then what we like to do is also in one of our phases is implement and support. So as we do in Coach It Enough, and Jael, you can speak more to this, is really empowering our partners to be able to do this without Coach It Enough. We want to come in and bring the audit. We want to help you navigate the true areas of improvement that you may need to work on and how you measure success in this area. But at the end of the day, what does it look like when we're able to empower our partners? And you've been able to see partners all the way through the cycle of what we do and see them at the under end, see them improved in certain areas. What has been your experience in seeing a partner all the way through to the end?
It's beautiful because, I mean, Mark just mentioned it so well in the chat. When what gets communicated up front gets done. I'll put it very simple. I think that's very important. When you put money, time, and energy through things, we find a way to get them done. And we're talking with the industry like the tech that knows it. I mean, when you put money and time, you get products done on a timeline. And so what we do is just assist to say, let's make sure we assess the right things so we know where we're putting money towards and what's going to give us the most effectiveness and success. Let's create a timeline, which is the diversity audit, and let's execute. And what has been fun is to honestly see organizations that 2 years ago, didn't have diversity statements, had a negative culture around these topics, didn't discuss it. Now they have statements, they discuss racial and cultural situations. Also, they've beaten their competitors in recruiting specific people because people go to their websites, they look and they say, oh, you've done stuff around diversity, you take this serious. So it's been so cool to see organizations have like 5% people of color to move to like 25% people of color. And it's not, they didn't do it for the people of color, but we know and data shows people of color when they're applying for jobs, and most people, you're looking at what the organization values, what they lift up, and do they care about that? And it's been so exciting to like see them be successful, have diversity task force, and that's just a system, and then get to step back and say, it's yours now. You owned it. Let's celebrate together.
Yeah, that's right. And really, I just want to add really quickly to that, Jael. And Mark asked a good question. I think we underestimate how easy it is to change culture. We think it's this big, lofty change management. Look at your supply chain. Look at all your, like, changing culture is how you interact human to human. So if that is looking at, and we mentioned this in our other session, our other workshop, is how do you even identify microaggressions and nonverbal communication where things are not said. And so when you start to study bias and when you start to study how to combat these things, it comes down to accountability, who's in the room, power dynamics, who's interrupting who is speaking more in terms of who gets more mic time at a meeting, trying to really limit that and being able to hear voices around the entire table. So who's invited to the table to speak? And that starts to change the culture of your organization. And if you're a leader, if you're a CEO, if you lead a department, you are the one that is able to start changing that culture by allowing everyone's voice to be heard. So let's not underestimate how easy it is to change culture little by little. Jael, do you want to address Mark's question?
Yeah. So I do want to say, Mark, this is a great question. We get to work with a lot of companies and partners with people who genuinely want and care about these topics, but don't know how to execute and don't know where to start. And that's why we just do a diversity audit. It's to say, here's where you're at, and then also here's where you should start at. And so one of the best things we say is, until we know the reality around your policies, your processes, your culture, psychological safety, and how you track and what training you provide, it's hard for us to give you suggestions, because different organizations have a different culture, location, even a dynamic. So we like to start with, give us some information or some data that allows us to say, here's where you should start. Because there's no cookie cutter model. But what I think we're seeing a lot of organizations do is try to copy what other organizations are doing, which causes actually more confusion because it doesn't fit their organization.
Really quickly, wanted to add to that. Mark asked another question. To answer the real bottom line question, the answer is yes, Mark. We are running to a lot of more people and companies who desire change. And we've seen a huge turnaround this year due to unfortunate events, which is a whole nother conversation. But due to unfortunate events, people have, we've seen bravery and courage with CEOs who don't know what to do and how to get started, but they at least want to take the next step forward with whatever that looks like for their company.
Yeah. So to the second question, it's so interesting because the companies and the type of people who've reached out to us the most have been in specific sectors. So the tech has grown in the last year, significant numbers. K-12 is high, nonprofit, and then somewhat for-profit has been like where we're getting into a little bit more now in the last, I would say, 2 years. And so what I've been curious about is to answer your question, Mark, I think specific industries have a more desire to address the issues quickly than others. And then other industries will take a little more time to catch on board. But it's been fascinating to see now the conversation around diversity, inclusion, and equity is no longer like hey, it's an option. Now it becomes like hey, we need to do it. The question is, where do we go? Who do we trust? And where should we start?
Yeah, that's good. And about the local town municipalities, JL, do you want to answer that in terms of the different types of industries that we're partnering with?
Yeah. So I thought I just said it. We're going tech, nonprofit. We focus a lot of community based. So we've worked with a few community organizations specifically in their demographic. So neighboring communities that said, hey, we have a community center that we want to find better ways to be effective in reaching different new demographics. A good niche has been for us is finding in towns, what are the places that most people go to or should go to as a whole, and maybe creating a strategic plan to say, this is the place that we want to address diversity and inclusion in a holistic way, which is community center, an outreach organization that most people would go to and interact with.
Right. And we've also had the opportunity, and I'll go to the next slide too. We've had an opportunity to be able to work with not only national organizations, but different regions within the country. And so, for example, we just had a partner out in Portland area, and we've had to deal with sensitivity towards the protests that were ongoing during our assessments, during our focus groups, really sensitive to what was going on in that region of the country. And being aware of those things. And so you'll see throughout the country, there's a much bigger awareness of no matter where you are in the US, this is touching every industry and touching every region, no matter where you're at. So we've definitely seen a desire for that across the country and across the nation.
And we got that Q&A. Thanks for asking these questions. Any other questions? This is great.
So we want to, as you think about questions, we want to provide you with a document. And I know that April, the organizer, is going to work with us on getting your emails to be able to send you a PDF tool for you to use in terms of really learning the diving more into these three nuggets that we're providing in terms of equity, inclusion, and diversity. So we really, Cultured Enough, again, we're about empowering our partners. So if you can go ahead and do it without us and do it well, we're all for it. But until then, please educate yourself. Use the tools that we want to provide, because intention, as we just spoke about, is great. However, it is not it's not the solution. And sometimes, and I know JL, you've seen it also, is where even with good intentions, there's more damage done when people try to implement this work out of context and without data involved as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and that's where it comes to the handout we have. Is just some things to think about with your leadership. If you've been navigating this space and you have a diversity task force, you have training throughout, you have a training timeline, you update your policies. That's great. But if you're starting from scratch and you're like, I don't know where to start, a good thing to start is to really just go. I mean, if you go to our website, we give you free materials, like I think the one's 5 ways to hire diverse people when it comes to job applications. Also, we have a podcast, a newsletter. The goal is that we want to give as much content. And I say this because we started to help small and medium-sized businesses. So we want to make sure that it's not just the big ones, that the corporate that can afford these type of services. So even if that's just listening to podcasts that we have, using some of our free materials, start somewhere so that you can at least start this conversation and work towards a diversity, inclusion, and equity instead of just waiting around, because that says something, especially when it comes to your staff and leading them in these types of conversations.
Really good. Love it. Does anyone have any other questions, or even we can talk a little bit about more Cultured Enough does as well in detail, but really want to hear from the audience. Maybe what your role is within your organization. How have you seen obstacles within your workplace, or what are things to celebrate as well? We love to hear good stories in terms of healthy cross-cultural interactions or progress made within your organization. So if you could be willing to share just a little bit about yourself, maybe where you're from or your role, and a question or a comment would be great. All right. So while we wait for those, definitely a little bit about Cultured Enough. Like JL said, we do work with.
Vincent just said something.
Okay. Oh, they have a culture club. That's what's up. We have a culture club dedicated to keeping the pulse on things.
Yeah.
Cool way to say it. I like that.
Yeah, I've heard of things like that before. I'm assuming like that club allows people to share things and awareness. It creates a good awareness of here's where the organization's at. And that's been one of the things, Vince, I'm glad you shared. Something that some people think is small, but it actually is very big, is to have a group that is processing, asking questions, saying, hey, should we address this topic now? This just happened. And making sure that the organization is aware of it. So that's just huge. It's so encouraging to hear what you just shared, Vincent.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think we've seen where a lot of diversity councils or task force are able to provide the entire staff or entire company with resources on just learning. Everyone make it a learning environment that everyone's learning in this together, which is really good. Thanks, Adam. Thank you for that. So I want to go really quickly about Cultured Enough. Medium to size businesses, and what we do is we do 3 phases, and we work with partners. One is the diversity audit and assessment, where we use our tools in terms of focus groups and to create qualitative and quantitative data to get a pulse on where your organization at in a climate. And we provide a thorough, could be up to 100-page executive summary to present to your CEO and senior leadership about where you're at in terms of your organization. The second part is really helping just go over a diversity task force and council. How do you create that? So Vincent, to him, would be a culture club. So how do you create a diversity task force with a chair that is moving these items forward? because then we also help create a diversity strategic plan. And like I think we mentioned in trainings, which was the first secret, is that don't do trainings alone. We do trainings within a strategic plan where you understand there's data behind why you need the training, and there's data behind the results of what the training will produce. So we like to see trainings within that container of a strategic plan, 3 to 4 year strategic plan. Then one of our favorite and third phases is empowerment. How do we empower you to do the job well, do it thoroughly, so that you can have a healthy culture, cross-cultural interactions within your organization as a CEO, whether you're white or you're dealing with this for the first time. We want to see you empowered as much as possible, so that you can have all the tools that you need to set you up for success. Jael, do you want to add any of those phases?
No, I love it. Like I said, the funnest part is when the organization, and I say it's leadership in the organization, feels comfortable. They have the language, they know where to go, and they're not worried about making healthy learning mistakes to have healthy interactions, cross-cultural interactions with people. And so I think what Vincent just shared about the cultural club, like all those things are so beautiful when organizations can get there to a point where they say, hey, this is going to be a part of our culture, and we're always going to get a pulse, and we want to keep growing and learning, especially in the tech industry, that I just fully believe innovation is how the tech industry thrives. And so innovation when it comes to diversity too, and what that looks like. So I just feel like the tech industry could be a good example of how to do innovation around equity, inclusion, and diversity, because they already know how to be innovative.
Yeah, I love it. This is a great conversation. Thanks, guys, for your just engagement in your chat. This has been great. If you want to learn more, culturedenough.com. I think we've put it in the chat a couple of times. We do have a form there. So if you are a CEO or leader within your company and you'd like to learn more, there is definitely a info form there for you to fill out. I think Kate or Carolina has already filled one out. So we look forward to having a conversation with you, Carolina, on that. But yes, we love this conversation. We get to do this great work. We know it's not easy, but it's definitely rewarding on all sides.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for coming through, and looking forward to maybe meeting some people in person.
Yep. Have a good rest of your day. Shout out to Chris for giving us this opportunity.
Yeah.
And we'll see you guys around in the platform. Thanks, guys.